For our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard, Mike, and Brett here with something that's very refreshing, very interesting, and we might dare say you might not have heard of. We're talking today to Isabelle Boemeke. Isabelle is the author of a new book that just came out, Rad Future, The Untold Story of Nuclear Electricity and How It Will Save the World. She's also has a social media name, if you will, and podcast and publications of all kinds under the label Isodope. And if you follow Isodope, some of you may know about it, but she's using social media to promote her views on nuclear, which are very positive views. So it's really a story of so many things: energy, society, the world, a person of passion and influence. Isabelle, let me stop and just say thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to visit with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, and congrats on getting the book out. We know that's no small feat.
Yes, I just realized that it's been 3 years since I started writing or thinking about the book, so it was a long time.
Well, we can't wait to talk to you about your journey and everything you've learned and all the feedback. It's going to be fantastic. Mike, what would you tell us before we jump in with Isabelle?
Yeah, we'll try to keep it relatively quick today. I'd say from the standpoint of broader equity markets, we're kind of going sideways, but guess what? We continue to hit all-time highs with the S&P 500. Obviously, we're entering Q2 earnings season, so I think, what's really kind of kept this market afloat most of the year has just been these tech stocks and this AI capital spending trends. Google reports tomorrow after the close, so we'll probably get a little glimpse of that. So I think that's going to continue to drive the markets. One thing that's interesting is, you remember this meme issue out there, these meme stocks that popped up several years ago. They're popping up again. Kohl's is up 100% today on double the equity trading volume. And the only reason I mention that is not to mention Kohl's itself, but just to say that when speculation starts building into these markets, that concerns me. And this is the first time we've seen this start to happen this cycle. So something to watch out for. From an energy market standpoint, it's all been about oil service earnings. Schlumberger reported last week. Halliburton reported today. Mostly trends in North America are lower. Pricing is lower. Earnings are going lower. Everyone knew this. The funny thing is, today those Halliburton reported its numbers, and the stock was up as well as most of the other companies. And all I'd say is that I think most people think that Q2 is going to be pretty bad for a lot of these companies. It's kind of proving to be that case, but the stocks are rallying, so we're probably close to a bottom on these names. Today, you're going to have EQT and Range come out with their numbers, so they'll be giving you an idea of what things look like in the gas E&P land. So that's something we're looking for, and sort of setting the stage for the conversation today. So wanted to talk about nuclear stocks, SMR stocks, and utility sector. Utility sector year to date is up 13%. We've said this for years that the utility sector is a growth sector. It continues to be one of the best performing sector. The S&P 500 is up about 7%, and big tech AI is up about 12%. IPPs are up roughly 50%. Today, we had the PJM Capacity Auction results. If you recall, last year when the auction came out, prices were up 600%, talking about 270 a megawatt versus 30 a megawatt typically. Today's auction came out, the PJM, it was around 330 a megawatt versus last year around 269, 270. So, all in, cost rose from 14.7 billion to 16.1 billion, so about a 10% increase. After the close, you're seeing stocks like Constellation Energy, Talon Energy, and Vista Corp are up modestly after hours. The only thing that we'd kind of note is maybe this might be a sell the news event. I think a lot of people have been watching this PJM auction. It came out good. It wasn't explosive. It was good. And so you might see a little bit of sell the news on this print. The last thing we'd say is small modular reactors are up about 175% year to date, and that's with names like Centrus Energy up 225%, Oklo up 200%, and NuScale up around 150%. One last thing I saw before we were coming into this meeting today is that Japan is talking about, and specifically Kansai Electric Power Company is talking about potentially building a nuclear plant. First time we've heard discussion like that since the Fukushima incident in 2011. So that is interesting. Not only is Japan talking about it, only half their capacity is working right now. They're talking about new nuclear. We've seen something in Britain and we see this in Europe. So nuclear is definitely a topic we want to talk to our guests, and we're looking forward to it.
Well, that's a lot. Brett, anything you would add in before we jump in with Isabelle?
No, I think Mike really hit on the real top stories of the week today.
Well, Isabelle, let's jump in. I was thinking, the book comes out August 12th. We got an advance copy. Loved it. Thank you. The world has changed so much. You referenced that you started working on the book 3 years ago. When you think back to what we were talking about 3 years ago, what the world felt like, what the climate discussion was, what the energy discussion was, and nuclear was, we were barely starting to make the argument that you shouldn't shut down existing plants. Like, that's about as far as maybe it had gotten. And now, to Mike's point, the nuclear stocks are some of the darlings of the investment space. When you take a step back, are you just stunned at how nuclear has changed so much as you've been watching it?
Completely stunned. And I think the best way to even just explain how stunned I am is we're talking about all this news, and Brett says, these are my top daily news. And when I started doing this work 5 years ago of promoting nuclear electricity to my followers, there were weeks that went by without any nuclear news in terms of projects starting or big investments announcements in nuclear startups. And right now, I cannot even keep up. Every single day, a new announcement comes out. Some hyperscaler, signs an agreement with a nuclear startup or makes a big investment. So it's shocking, really, how quickly things changed, especially for an industry like nuclear that was mostly dead in the United States for about 3 decades. And I think that really highlights how important sometimes the work of advocates and people who keep trying to change the conversation can be. Because 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, everyone would have said, forget about it. This is a dead technology. We're moving towards renewables. Nuclear is a part of the past.
Because I've seen some of your things online, and one of the things you talk about is the world, for some reason, and you go into these reasons, but the world, quote, had it wrong, or the world had embraced a storyline around nuclear that just really wasn't fair or accurate or, thoughtful. It's amazing when those types of things happen, but they happen. Mm-hmm. As you've been telling the nuclear story, what has surprised you? I know one thing is that young people have really embraced in nuclear. That's just one feature of the landscape. But what are some other things, as you've been telling this story, that have surprised you about people's receptivity or their understanding or what really resonates with them when you try to tell the story?
I think you hit the nail on the head in that it's a generational issue. And if you go back into the history of the anti-nuclear movement, this was very much the cool thing to be in the 70s, right? It was cool to be anti-Vietnam War. It was cool to be anti-nuclear. Those things usually came together. It was more of an anti-establishment movement that had all these different elements, and nuclear just ended up being a part of that. However, when you get to the younger generations, people who are young millennials or Gen Z, they grew up with climate change. They didn't grow up with nuclear being their main concern. And by the way, those people back in the 70s, their main concern was nuclear war. And it kind of got all tangled up with nuclear electricity as well. But people my generation and younger, we grew up with climate change being our biggest issue. And so we look at a technology like nuclear, and even though a lot of people might have grown up hearing that it's dangerous or vaguely knowing that it's bad, they don't have that much emotional baggage associated with it. And so as soon as you start telling them simple facts like nuclear is the biggest source of clean energy in the United States, second largest source of clean energy in the world, you slowly open their minds, and they are very quick to embrace the technology. So that has been not surprising, I would say, but that has been heartwarming to witness. In terms of the surprising elements, It has honestly been that I thought there would be a much larger pushback from the anti-nuclear movement at large, or people who were anti-nuclear back then, even around things like the extending Diablo Canyon's operations until 2030 instead of shutting it down this year, or reopening TMI. I mean, want to talk about the biggest news in terms of, talking about a plant that had a very important role in the anti-nuclear movement, and there is barely any outrage. So I think that also shows how much public perception has changed.
So can I ask you if the quote anti-nuclear movement, like not to pick on anybody, but who is that today? Like where would that come from? If you announced a new nuclear plant and hundreds of people showed up with signs, like where would that just be spontaneous, like old anti-war people, or like who would be organizationally, where does the anti-nuclear movement reside now?
So I think there's definitely different spheres of anti-nuclear, right? There's the hardcore Greenpeace type people who will show up to events. For example, last year I went to Brussels to speak at an event, and there was a large demonstration. And so they show up outside, and not to pick on the elderly, it is always very, very old people, and like bless their heart, but they're protesting with their little signs, and they've had those signs since the 70s. Never do I see young people, which is very telling. So you have the Greenpeaces of the world, but then you have the somewhat anti-nuclear that are maybe not going to show up and protest, but they're going to try to prevent nuclear from being a part of the conversation. So like NRDC, Friends of the Earth, some of these other big environmental organizations are still very much anti-nuclear. But again, I don't think they're very well organized in terms of protesting.
And maybe just comment on, because you travel, you see lots and lots of people. It's not always the same by country, but what do you observe as you kind of look around the globe and attitudes around nuclear? Like what surprises you?
What always surprises me is when you go to countries like, I recently went to Finland to see their deep geologic repository for their spent fuel. And for those who haven't had a chance to look it up, it's amazing. It's called Onkalo. They've been building it for 40 years. They're almost done. And I visited this plant with a lot of journalists from different countries, and they were all shocked by how much intention there was behind this project, on how much this company thought about the entire process of disposing of spent fuel. People from Italy, from Germany, from France, who all were slightly anti-nuclear and had lots of questions about the waste, they were just absolutely stunned by how much care there is in this process of disposing of waste. And so I think what constantly amazes me is that the more you expose people in different countries to how nuclear works, how to dispose of, so to speak, yeah, how nuclear works, how to dispose of the waste, all these different facts about nuclear, you demystify it for them in real life, and you can see their brains immediately switching and being like, oh, okay, this is this is a great technology. And so I think what you see now around the world is that people are being exposed to all these narratives, either through social media or going and visiting. And I'm seeing the change, even in Germany, which frankly is still considered the land of the anti-nuclear movement, right? I mean, Germany very famously made a terrible historic mistake of phasing out of nuclear and relying on Russian gas, which is, go figure. I don't understand those people. But even they are now talking about potentially reopening some of their plants. I mean, who knows if it's gonna happen? But we also see their actions in the broader EU energy transition conversation, where they used to be vehemently against nuclear, and now they're going to say they're not going to oppose. So it's been extremely interesting. And just another point, you also mentioned Japan talking about potentially building a new nuclear power plant, but they're also reopening several of their closed ones since the Fukushima accident. And Japan is a country that has a very complicated history with nuclear technologies, obviously starting with the bomb and then with the Fukushima accident. So if you look at a country like Japan that has this history, reopening their plants and talking about building new ones, it just tells you how much excitement there is.
So you're in this world where you're trying to get a message out, and you've found a way to use social media to do that. And I would dare say there's probably a lot of people listening or watching who they understand a lot about energy, they understand a lot about so many things, but the world of I'm going to take my message into TikTok and social media, and I'm going to take content, but I'm going to wrap it in, current day, other day, modern day messaging, and I'm going to find a way to, quote, be an influencer. Like, that's just a mysterious world for a lot of people. Like, can you take us into that, and what is it like, and how many followers do you have, and can you go to the grocery store without being mobbed? I mean, I'm just, but like, what is all that like? Because I dare say, maybe Brett could do it, but Mike and I could not become influencers in any issue. I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure if you set your mind to it, you can do it. I believe in you.
I fished that out of you. You're just being nice, but. Do you have like a team of 10 people who are like working on all these videos and stuff? Like, are you just doing this yourself?
So I wish I had a team of 10 people. So when I started doing this work, this was 2020, deep in COVID quarantine. So I had nothing else to do but cook and clean and make videos. So my original videos, where it all started, they were extremely elaborate. I used a green screen, and I used, GIFs and fun illustrations and lots of moving footage just to keep people excited. And it would take me 2 weeks to edit 1 minute long video, which is insane in hindsight. And nowadays I do much less elaborate content for obvious reasons. So I just try to more broadly talk about the benefits, still try to incorporate some elements of art and fashion, which is my background. But there are influencers who are scientists. There is a very famous nuclear scientist that posts lots of videos online, both on TikTok, but also on YouTube. So there are several people who are scientists or any other profession and are also influencers. I think the most important thing when you're creating content for the general public is to try to simplify your message as much as possible. And I don't say this as in a way to dumb it down, as people like to say it, but it's just truly thinking from, you have to try to think as someone who has never been exposed to the material before. So try to reduce your vocabulary, try to explain things in everyday language so that people can understand. I always like to do comparisons. So like when I talk about uranium pellets, the fuel used in nuclear power plants, I talk about it being the size of a gummy bear because most people have seen a gummy bear before. So they can create an image in their mind. So yeah, just try to bring it back to daily things that people come across and also make it relevant with the times, as you were saying.
Isabelle, I mean, really interested in sort of your background. I mean, if you would ask me 3 or 4 years ago whether you'd start Isodope and whether you'd have a nuclear book in 3 years, I'd be like, what are you talking about, right? So maybe kind of talk to us a little bit how you came to this spot. I mean, why the interest in nuclear energy? I mean, obviously, you mentioned COVID, a lot of that, but just it doesn't sound like that would be a big topic that maybe a lot of the younger generation would be thinking. What attracted you to basically say, you know what, I don't know a lot about this, I'm going to learn more about this, and you know what, there's a lot of untruths out there. And you know what? I'm going to talk about it. Just kind of talk about the journey.
So about almost 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think about, I came randomly across a tweet, at the time it was a tweet, by a planetary scientist called Carolyn Porco. And in it, she talked about molten salt thorium reactors, which lots of people in the nuclear space become attracted to nuclear because of molten salt thorium reactors, which is a funny, random fun fact. And I was very curious about it, but at the time, 10 years ago, I tried Googling molten salt thorium reactors, and I couldn't get anything that, I could understand. Back then, I didn't know anything about nuclear, period. So imagine trying to understand how a molten salt thorium reactor worked. But that kind of stuck with me. And for many years, I would, go to conferences and talk to different people who were working in the climate space or energy space. And I would ask them about nuclear, or specifically about molten salt thorium reactors. And they would say, well, I don't know anything about that. But let me tell you, nuclear is pretty good. We need it. We definitely need it. But people just hate it. And that became such an intriguing fact. How could it be that this technology that is necessary, is much safer than people think, be hated? And that was honestly just a curiosity for many, many years, until the fires in 2019 in Australia and the Amazon. And I think most people here that are listening to this will remember those images. It was a particularly bad fire year. So we had the big fires in Australia, then in the Amazon, and also in California. So photos of the orange skies. And at the time, I was working both as a fashion model, but also as an entrepreneur. I had a cosmetics company. And I just felt like both of those things were completely useless. And I didn't want to spend any more time either being a fashion model or trying to sell cosmetics. I wanted to do something about climate change. And in hindsight, that sounds so naive. And I started looking into solutions to climate change, and sure enough, came across nuclear again. And that was the first time in many, many years I dedicated myself to trying to understand the technology. And it very quickly occurred to me that the reason why people hated it was because they didn't know anything about it, or everything they knew was based on either lies or misinformation. And that's where I felt like I could come in with my very limited skill set at the time, and basically just relying on my social media platform to try and translate the very technical and sometimes boring, science behind nuclear into something that people could understand and get them excited about it.
When you look at your podcast, I mean, how is that broken down by geography? I mean, is it more North America? How is that looking? And my next question would be, based on that, I mean, what are the different thought processes with, say, Europeans versus Americans versus Asians on this whole nuclear renaissance? Is it equally the same across geographies, or is there one particular area that's ahead of the other or behind?
So in terms of my following, it's mostly North America because my content is in English, but I do have a lot of Brazilian followers because that's where I'm from. And in terms of the nuclear renaissance, it seems to be happening everywhere in terms of the excitement, right? You have countries like France, which at some point not that long ago was trying to cut down on their share of nuclear electricity to try and increase their share of renewables for some arbitrary, pardon my language, bullshit reason. And now they're back on the nuclear train, just, full on building new reactors. They have 8 planned, if I'm not mistaken. And all the other countries that we talked about. So you definitely see the excitement everywhere. I think now the question is more, are we going to see this renaissance through? And this is a conversation that I'm curious to have with both of you, because there have been previous nuclear renaissances and they didn't necessarily succeed. And I think it's interesting to see all the different countries taking different approaches and how that's going to unfold.
Oh yeah, the Renaissance is going to succeed, guys. This time we're going to do it, right? But I have no justification for that yet, but we'll watch it and we'll see, right? No, I have my fingers crossed, and there's tons of things that we could look forward to, like all the news we've spoken about here today. But,
Mhm.
Isabel, thinking kind of more in the vein of kind of what we were, just talking about how you got into this, how nuclear energy is perceived, or the development of new nuclear projects is being looked at in other nations. One of the things that your book dived into, and your book dives into, is really some of the demographic challenges around nuclear support that might put you in a very unique place to have found this technology first and to jump into it, and that's kind of a gender gap or barrier here and everything. And so how do you see that being something that gets resolved, and why do you think it is that perhaps, taking your own words, I don't mean to, but the misinformation or the lies or whatever drives the misunderstanding here might have been better received by females or by, that particular demographic?
So everywhere you look in the world, there is, to your point, Brad, a gender gap, meaning most men support nuclear and most women don't. And that's true every single country, which is in itself fascinating, right? What's the reason behind that? There could be several different reasons, and I'm not going to pretend to be a social scientist and try to fully understand the female human psyche. Women in general tend to be more risk averse, and unfortunately, nuclear is perceived as a high risk technology because of the couple of accidents that people bring up every time you mention nuclear. So that's one of the things that could totally be changed just by informing the public more generally about how safe nuclear is, how it's actually on par with renewables like solar and wind, and even safer than hydro. So there are certain things that can be, I believe, addressed just with more information. There are other things, and this is something that Jessica Lovering has worked on and talked about extensively, which is nuclear historically has been viewed as a top-down, big government technology. And also women in general tend to be more averse to that power structure. Those are all interesting, questions. But I think at the end of the day, Brett, to your point, I think if women hear the message about nuclear's benefits from a woman, I think that helps as well, because they can communicate in a way in which they understand.
Isabel, on those demographics, can you just give us a range, help people understand just how pronounced the delta is, like how much women tend to lag men in the positivity towards nuclear?
In the United States, it can be up to 32 points, right? In the difference between men and women in support for nuclear. So it's pretty wide, obviously, to your point. And in other countries, it's even broader, that gap. Countries like India and Brazil as well, which unfortunately my home country tends to be very anti-nuclear. This is very pronounced and everywhere. So I think if we want those numbers to change, we're going to have to see a lot more female nuclear spokespeople.
It is fascinating. And we probably all, like you, have the same instinct, like we don't pretend to understand it, and it's best to not just start firing off theories. You'll probably mess it up. But maybe one question for you as we were going through that, I was struck by the nuclear industry over the years. How have they been reacting to you? Right? Because this is a industry full of science-minded, engineering-minded, people. Generally, when we meet them, people have been doing it for a long time, and then here comes sort of a revolutionary young lady using social media, getting people excited. How has the industry reacted to you? Do they invite you to events? Do they help promote you? What's that been like? I'm sure it's been changing as you go.
Surprisingly, the nuclear industry has been very receptive. Probably took them a little while to be receptive. And maybe I'm gonna ask Brett about that because he has met me since the beginning. But obviously in the beginning you have this person who is not from the industry who starts making very abstract social media content about nuclear. I think a lot of people had questions and didn't know how serious my efforts were going to be, but I slowly proved that I was trying to help. And also one of the things that I did that really helped cement my position in this industry was leading a grassroots campaign to save Diablo Canyon in California. And after that effort, the industry was even warmer towards me. But I have to say, I'm constantly invited to speak at industry conferences, and the women especially have been extremely receptive to me. I think they understand that it's great to have somebody who can translate that message. And to your point as well about it being such a science-heavy topic, that's one of the reasons why women are not that generally interested in it, is because it's always presented as this very high-tech, very, science-y thing. Whereas if you can bring the technology down to how it benefits people and how it benefits them individually and especially, I think that's very important.
I was curious, some of this is, nuclear is, it's got a new look for a number of reasons. One is, to your point, people said, oh gosh, look at all this power and it's so low impact, like the emissions are so reduced. But another reason why is people have realized, but you tell me, power is a good thing. Energy is a good thing. Having more energy is a good thing. You need power to run a data center, all these types of things. Like, how have you noticed over time, it seems like probably in the first part of your journey, the fact that nuclear was seen as a climate answer was probably a big part of it. But the more time goes on, the more it becomes, hey, it's really good for AI. It's really good for national security. It's really good for a lot of reasons. Like, are you noticing your audience changing or some of the talking points changing, if you will?
Definitely, in terms of the broader support. So I came into this work because of climate change. So most of my followers are still there. That's their main concern. But I would argue that even beyond climate change, nuclear is just a better technology, right? I always make the case whenever somebody asks me, what is your 1-minute elevator pitch on nuclear? I say, well, nuclear can create loads of clean electricity while reducing the impact on the environment. And I think most people are interested in that. They don't know that nuclear has some of the lowest material requirements, some of the lowest land requirement out of all energy sources. So there are several different reasons why people come to love nuclear. But nowadays, yes, there's a lot of excitement because of AI, because of data centers. And the reality is that this demand and this need came at a very important time. I would say, at the most important time for nuclear, because we now have not just the excitement, but also the private investment that comes with it from these hyperscalers who are interested in the technology.
So you raised one thing. This is quite a renaissance. It's stunning how things have changed in a short period of time. When you think about the risks that this, for some reason, slows down dramatically, dare I say, reverses, like what do you think of as this current wave of popularity that nuclear has? What are the risks to that? How do you perceive them?
There are many risks, obviously. Before Fukushima, there was a nuclear renaissance, and in part because of Fukushima, but for several other reasons, including renewables becoming very cheap and fracking, coming along and also being extremely cheap. That renaissance did not did not happen. So I would say if there is a major accident, it might cause the renaissance to slow down. But also if there is a major change in political support. So right now what we're witnessing is quite stunning, but nuclear is maybe the only energy source that has bipartisan support. The Biden administration was extremely pro-nuclear, passed several subsidies, tax credits under the IRA. The Trump administration has just, Trump signed 4 executive orders trying to get the United States to become the world's leader in nuclear. So it's quite amazing that we have this level of bipartisan support. I'm very careful to ensure that we keep this bipartisan support, because the last thing we want is for a different administration to come along and try to take subsidies away, which would absolutely kill the industry again. Right now, unfortunately, nuclear is still expensive in the United States, and the only way we're going to get back on track is with a lot of government support.
Isabelle, in the beginning of the podcast, we kind of talked about how SMRs year to date are up like 175%. Over the last 12, 18 months, they're probably up 400, 500%. I was curious, and when you talk about your listeners and your followers, do they distinguish, between nuclear being like sort of large scale nuclear and SMR companies? What do they think about each? Do they know one better than the other? I mean, is there more education to be done in the SMR area? What are your thoughts there?
That they definitely do, and they usually say, "What's the deal with this small, advanced reactor?" So I would say most people have heard about SMRs, at least in abstract, the concept of advanced, smaller nuclear that has all these benefits.
I have to ask one question. Are your listeners buying nuclear stocks?
Probably, yes.
One of the reasons I asked that, it's one thing to have a nuclear plant 10 miles away in some abandoned area versus an SMR at the Walmart a half a mile away. I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of adoption, a lot of coming around to nuclear. I guess my question is there any of this NIMBY issue with nuclear at this point in time where it's like it's great in someone else's backyard, but really not my backyard? Have we kind of passed that threshold?
Well, NIMBY is a problem with everything, right? You want to build housing, NIMBY is a problem. You want to build a solar farm, even though people like solar, they just don't want it in their backyard. I think in terms of nuclear, we're very far from getting an SMR in our Walmart. Let's just be clear. But in terms of the large power plants, the closer you get to a nuclear power plant, the more the community loves it. So when you go to people who live very near a nuclear power plant, there's like 90% approval rate. That's because it benefits the communities immensely, creates tons of jobs. Diablo Canyon in California has over 1,000 stable, high-paying jobs that are multi-generational because these plants can run for 80 years. And what you have to understand is that in the United States alone, you could build reactors at existing plants. So you already have that support from the community surrounding it. In terms of the SMRs, TBD. Ironically, the work that I've done in the past few years is to tell people that yes, SMRs are great, they do not exist. So let's right now build the technology that we do have, which is large nuclear. I know it's expensive. I know, people have all sorts of feelings about it. But if you go right now and you try to buy an SMR, you're not going to be able to, because this technology is still not commercially available. So what I've been trying to say is let's support nuclear. Let's start building large nuclear reactors right now, which is something that Trump's executive orders also focus on. So I think he ordered 10 large reactors to be built. In the meantime, I think what the executive orders mandated is also great, which is send all these nuclear startups to Idaho National Labs or some other federal land, have them build their prototype, prove that the technology works, and then scale them afterwards. And then we can have a conversation about SMRs. And let's not even talk about fusion, please.
Isabelle, you bring up a lot of great points, and I can't agree more about let's just get something done here, right? And everything. But you also bring up that kind of many of the traditional pieces that we would look at have kind of fallen into place. We've got good public support, you've got good bipartisan support, you've got subsidies, you've got funding, you've got, for the first time ever, hyperscalers and other folks considering nuclear projects and nuclear technology and PPAs and restarting 3 Mile Island, all of this stuff that when I met you starting even to think about this sort of world, almost a decade ago at this point, we would never have dreamed of. So what's missing, or is nothing missing and we just gotta shut up and watch it happen? Or, where do you see the biggest sort of levers needed here in the next several years?
Well, I think that a lot of the industry folks will tell you that the financing is still a big topic, right? How do we finance these incredibly expensive projects that have, it takes 30 to 40 years to see any return on it. So I think that's still a big question that some companies and folks are trying to figure out. And then quite frankly, this is what I tell nuclear industry leaders whenever I do talk to them, is now it's time for them to figure this out. It's time for them to be better project managers, and it's time for them to try to control the costs. I mean, unfortunately, there's nothing more I can do from a public perception standpoint. Nuclear has one of the highest levels of public acceptance in the United States. It's now 61%. The highest level of public acceptance was 2010 before Fukushima, and it was 62%. So we're basically at an all-high level of highest confidence, so that people know that nuclear, can be counted as a part of the solution.
So I'm really curious, Isabelle, because what at our shop, and the reason we started this, ironically, we started COBT in 2020, and our observation was, wow, this energy stuff is complicated. This climate stuff is complicated. There's so many voices. There are very few places where you can talk about these things, frankly, and just ask your questions. You identified with nuclear like, hey, the world has it wrong here. The public talking points around this are not right, or this needs to be revisited. So it's amazing sometimes, the world does get stuff wrong. When you think about what you do next, or when you think about the fact that the world was getting nuclear wrong for a while, the world could be getting some other stuff wrong, and probably is getting some other stuff wrong. Do you see yourself, digging into other areas and trying to cast light on some of those narratives, if you will, and trying to bring some more visibility to them? Or do you see yourself doing more nuclear? Or what's next for you? And have you enjoyed this, which is kind of unpacking something that was misunderstood?
Oh, I have enjoyed it more than anything else in my life, except for my child, obviously. But starting this work 5 years ago, having no idea where it would lead, and no idea if I would have any impact whatsoever, or even just the grassroots effort on Diablo Canyon. Everybody told me to not waste my time. Everybody said it was a done deal, and now Diablo Canyon lives. I mean, I think very few people can say that they were able to contribute to something like that. So it brings me just so much joy. I'm a one issue person, one issue at a time, at least, just because I can't focus on several things at the same time. So I definitely want to spend a couple more years in nuclear. I want to make sure we see this renaissance through. That would be my next goal. But I have to say, one issue that I became very interested in while writing the book was AI safety, because I saw the many parallels between AI and nuclear technologies. And with the nuclear, the world was introduced to the worst possible version of the technology. It was introduced through the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so it was very easy for humans to gather the strength and the efforts to be able to collaborate internationally to try and prevent the spread of weapons. And with AI, it's inverted. With AI, we're being introduced to this technology through chatbots. And we still cannot comprehend what the Hiroshima or Nagasaki of AI are. And so I think we don't have a lot of incentives to put safeguards in place to prevent the worst uses of AI from being widespread in the world. So that is an area that I've become very interested in.
So your point is we may not be as fearful as we should be.
Yes.
Very interesting. Well, we got to ask you one last one, Isabelle. We always do this. 10 years from now, because we're always talking about 10 years from now. I know that seems like a long time. What do you think we're talking about in society as it relates to energy, climate, environment? Like, what does that picture out there look like? Are we, for instance, are we still talking about climate, or has the conversation changed to be something maybe more broad-based environmental, or what's your feeling for, we do the show 10 years from now, what are we talking about? What are the issues of the day?
I think we're still definitely talking about climate, maybe talking about different solutions. We might be focusing a lot more on carbon removal and some of those other technologies that are not necessarily just focusing on switching everything to clean electricity. Definitely AI, which is also crazy because 10 years ago, I don't think I would have given you this answer. We're going to be talking a lot about AI, and I hope that we're going to look back into not our conversation specifically today, but into the broader conversation of, do we need more energy? Is energy consumption going to increase or not? And just say, oh, we were so silly to even think that there was a possibility that energy consumption would decrease. I think we've just entered an era in the human species where energy consumption is just going to keep going up. And we don't even know what sorts of technological breakthroughs AI is going to bring along. And it can be a fascinating and amazing future if we get it right.
Oh, no, there's a great line. We might have to end with that one, Isabelle, darn it. But it was so good, I think we should.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you so much. Thank you both. And thanks for reading the book. I hope it was an easy read. That's
we
the
need
goal.
We need some extra copies for the office. I know it's coming out soon, so we need some for around the office.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. Thank you, Isabelle. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.